Everything's all here, including the new Polaroid OneStep 2. So if you're just getting into instant film or you've been shooting it since the 70s, let's talk about the current offerings from the new Polaroid Originals and how to get the most out of your vintage camera or your new one. Hey fellow photographers, what did you shoot today? Now I normally don't do this at the beginning of a video, but there's a lot of cool content coming up that I think everyone's going to be excited about. So if you're new here, if you could just take a moment and please subscribe to this channel with notifications enabled. It's quick, it's easy, it's free, and it really means a lot to me. Alright, well let's get right into it. The Impossible Project, as we know, has sort of bought Polaroid and is now branding under the name Polaroid Originals. They've also released a new camera, the Polaroid OneStep 2, and all new color film emulsions for all the vintage cameras. With this exciting new film, it begs the question, should I go for the new model or should I look for vintage models? There's a lot of really great vintage models available in the used market through eBay or thrift stores or even garage sales. But the question is, which one is right for you and which film am I supposed to use? So let's start with this. This is a land camera. It's a Polaroid land camera. This is the land camera 195 model. Now these models range anywhere from very, very simple to extremely complex with full manual controls like this one. The problem is that these take peel-apart film. The only peel-apart film that's sort of still available is this from Fuji. This is like FP100C. This is a 100 ISO color film, and it's a peel-apart film, but honestly, I don't think, they're not really making this anymore. It's been discontinued, and most of the stuff you're getting is, thawed out old stock that had been frozen, and they're just selling it. And also, the prices of this stuff has gone way, way up. Here's another funky example, the Polaroid Square Shooter, and if you open this up, it will tell you to only use type 88 film, which isn't really made anymore. So the land cameras and all the peel-apart films, they're really not going to work. So if you have one, it makes a good decoration or an ornament, something to add to your camera collection, but you're not really going to be able to shoot with it easily. Instead, we're going to focus our attention on these. These are the integral film formats. So the chemistry is all in one. So as the picture comes out, it's already developing. There's no need to wait and peel apart the film. Everything is contained in these film cartridges. And this is what Polaroid Originals has come out with, new color emulsions. And also they have a pretty good black and white emulsions for all these different formats. So there's 600 type film and Spectra film and SX70 film and I-type film. So what's the difference between these films? First, let's talk compatibility. It's pretty straightforward. You just buy the type of film that fits your camera, and it's pretty easy to tell. You can usually tell by, usually the name, like this Spirit 600 will take 600 series film. But if you're not sure, usually when you open the camera up, there'll be a little sticker, like right here that says 600. So this takes 600 series film. The original land camera that this sort of new one is the design is based off of, takes SX70 film, and you can tell that by opening this up, and it says here, use SX70 film. So you can usually tell by the sticker on the inside, or of course, Google is a thing, you can just look it up what type of film it takes. Now there are slight differences in the films themselves, so let's talk about that next. So let's take a closer look at these films and see how they're similar and how they differ. So first off, we can separate the films by format. These three on the left are going to produce a square negative, the actual area of the picture, which is about 3.1 inches square or 79 millimeters square. Spectra, on the other hand, is a little bit wider. It produces a negative that's 2.9 inches by 3.5 inches or 73 millimeters by 90 millimeters. Now the actual size of the entire picture, including the white border, will be bigger, but these represent the actual spaces of the photosensitive material. Next, we can talk about the speed of the film. So if we shift these around like that, these three films on the left are the same emulsion, and they have a speed of about 640 ISO. Now this isn't really important because the camera that it's designed for takes this into account and has already been calibrated for that. But one thing to note is that the SX70 film is about 160 ISO when it comes to the Impossible Project or Polaroid film. However, the original SX70 film was about 150 ISO. So a lot of people who use SX70 cameras actually to account for this little bit extra sensitivity of the film, they actually change the light dark tab slightly to the darker side to get a correct exposure. Something to keep in mind. Most of these films are pretty much calibrated for their cameras. These are calibrated for the SX70 cameras, but there is a little bit of compensation that's needed from most people and most reviews that I've read, a little bit on the darker side will help expose this film in an SX70 camera correctly. So next up, we're going to talk about power. Now, these are integral film packs, which basically means that for these three, the power is provided by batteries that are inside the film cartridges. You know, they look like this. So these little dots up here are actually batteries. These batteries go to power the functions of the camera, whether it be actually taking the picture, actuating the shutter, using the flash, using the autofocus. It's important that these old vintage cameras use these films, even though that this is the same size as these two formats here. You notice that it says not for vintage cameras, and that's because there are no batteries on the back of this film cartridge. So this will not work. The I-type film will not work in the old vintage cameras. Now, that brings me to another point, which is the price. So because the I-type film does not have a battery, it ends up being cheaper than the other films. And that's why there's a difference in price. So the US pricing for these as of now is $15.99 for the I-type film. And if we shift these around, it's going to be $18.99 for the two square format films. And because these are a little bit bigger negatives, $19.99 for the Spectra film. So it's important to note that if you're going to buy the new Polaroid OneStep 2, which can use either color film 600 or the I-type film, there's no reason to buy this film for the new Polaroid camera. You don't need the batteries because the batteries are internal to the OneStep 2. So you can save yourself $3 a pack on film. So that's one thing to factor into your pricing. You can get used Polaroid cameras really, really cheap, but over the long run, you're going to spend a little bit more on film because you have to have the battery for those vintage cameras. So if you're going to be shooting a lot of film, that's something to consider. Now, there's nothing that says you can't use 600 film on the I-type camera, but you're just wasting money because you're paying extra $3 for the batteries. So now that we have a better understanding of the film formats, let's talk about the cameras themselves. How you view the image you're about to take is really important. So a lot of the cameras that Polaroid makes, or even the new one, the OneStep 2, are rangefinders, meaning that there's a separate viewing window that is separate from the lens. So what I'm doing is I'm looking down this viewing window when the lens is actually seeing something different. So if I look in here, I see a little square frame, but this doesn't exactly line up due to parallax with what the lens sees. So I'm looking a little bit, in this case, to my left, whereas the lens is slightly, to the right. It's right, in the center of the camera, but the viewfinder is off to the left. So you're not going to get exactly what you see in the viewfinder, when you take the picture. That's something to consider. Now, there are other models like the SX70, which is actually an SLR. Now, you may be familiar with SLRs. It stands for single lens reflex, which means that when I look through this viewfinder, there's actually a mirror in here, a reflex mirror, that actually will direct light through the lens. So when I look through this camera, I'm actually seeing what the lens sees. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to both of these systems. In the rangefinder series, where you have a separate viewing window, you're not going to, what you see is not exactly what you're going to get, and the parallax error becomes more and more pronounced the closer your subject is. Now, a lot of these cameras don't have very, very close focusing distances, but some have macro attachments, and that becomes even more of an issue. The advantage is that usually these viewfinders are pretty clear. They're pretty crisp and clear, and they're bright. Now with the SLR models, what you see is what you get, but usually these lenses that Polaroid makes, they're small, so that they're not able to fit, wide open apertures in there. So the image can be a little dim because you're looking through the lens and you're limited by the light that's entering the lens as to what you can see and how bright that image is. So in low light situations, it may not be the easiest to focus and compose with this if you don't have enough light coming into the lens. Speaking of focus, the new Polaroid OneStep 2 is a fixed focus lens, so you have no control over the focus distance. It says that it can take pictures anywhere from 2 feet to infinity in focus, but you don't get that selective focus that you can get with other models. Some cameras are even more advanced, like this one, and they actually offer autofocus using a sonar system. And that's usually indicated by this little honeycomb pattern here. And what happens is that it sends out, sound waves that are imperceptible to your hearing, but it sends out sound waves, and when it receives the sound waves back, it can gauge the distance between this camera and your subject. Now, a lot of cameras that have the sonar autofocus also have a manual focus override where you can actually control the focus itself. And this is really helpful with things, like the SX70, which is an SLR, because you can actually focus on what you want to focus on. One limitation of the sonar system is it's not like the phase detect or contrast detect autofocus systems you're used to on your digital cameras. The issue is that it's actually sound waves. So if you're trying to shoot through, like, let's say a window, you want to take a picture, a frame within a frame, and you want to take a picture through a window. Well, guess what? The sound waves are going to bounce off the window and come back, and the camera thinks that you're trying to focus on the window, even though you might be looking at what's through the window. So in that case, that manual focus is going to come in handy. One last thing to consider, especially when buying a used Polaroid, is the age of the cameras. So the SX70 was the first type of camera to use the integral film packs, and it was released in 1972. The 600 series Polaroids that people are probably most familiar with, because they came in so many different varieties and styles, came about and really were popular in the 80s and 90s. So these cameras are usually newer than these cameras. Even newer than that, in 1986 came the Spectra series of cameras. This is a Spectra Pro, which is pretty much top of the line, and it has so many features it's ridiculous. Multiple exposures, timed exposures, autofocus, flash, it pretty much has it all. All things considered, these cameras were built to last, so I wouldn't worry about buying an older model as long as you can find one, preferably film tested. And the most important thing with any of these cameras, besides the features, if it has autofocus and that kind of stuff, making sure all those work, is the condition of the rollers. So these rolling rods, which actually push the film out and spread the chemistry over the film. The condition of these rollers, making sure they're not ding, damage, or have a bunch of corrosion or stuff stuck on them, that's probably the most important part of the camera. You can, of course, also buy the new Polaroid OneStep 2, which I think is an incredible value at $99. And, it's brand new, it's gonna work. It's got pretty basic features, but it gets the job done. It's a great entry-level Polaroid camera that has just enough features to get great photographs. My next video will actually be an in-depth analysis of this camera and why I think it's incredible value for the money. I've been having a lot of fun doing some test shots with this, and I'm going to show you those, including some color charts of the old versus new Impossible Project film. So we have the Polaroid Original Film and the Impossible Project film. So I'm going to put some high-res scans of these up on the next video. So stay tuned for that, because I think you're going to be pretty impressed with the quality of the new film. So that's a lot to consider, from film formats to different features of the different cameras. But I think the exciting thing is that we have a new film that really works really well for color, and we have all these options to choose from. So you can really cater and customize what you need out of your instant photography by going with these used models. I'm also really excited about the future of Polaroid with the advent of new cameras like this. So I really hope that in the pipeline, they started with the basic sort of one step, press the button and shoot, but I would really like to see an updated SX70, which I think would be absolutely incredible to have. But I'd love to get your take on it. What camera are you most excited about? What camera do you want to know more about? I have a few here to choose from, so if you want reviews on 600 series cameras or Spectra series cameras with all the different accessories and attachments, let me know in the comments. What are you most excited about? Have you got a Polaroid OneStep 2? They're actually sold out. They're so popular. So the next batch I think is going to ship around mid-November. So if you're looking to get this for the holiday season, it would make a great gift for anyone interested in photography or instant photography. Really think about putting your pre-order in now for the next shipment that's going to come out mid-November. This is off to a huge success, and I wish Polaroid the best of luck going forward, because this is really promising. So stay tuned, we got a lot more to cover. We got film tests to go over between old and new film. We've got reviews of a lot of the old classic vintage cameras and a review of the Polaroid OneStep 2. So until then, as always, happy shooting.